So I think what's important about this is I want your thoughts. You know, a lot of people say to me, well, why do you keep going back to Flint? You know, you've done everything you can, and there's a gazillion other cities that are being poisoned, contaminated, this and that. But I think to me, you know, everybody talks about, we don't want to make certain things seem normal, like Trump or anything like that. But basically, the government, both state and federal, have poisoned you. Let's say it wasn't intentional. You know, I don't have proof in front of me that they knowingly did it, but the response has certainly been intentional. And the lack of response has been intentional for the reasons you're talking about. Essentially, they're looking at this not as like, oh my God, we poisoned these people. We need to go above and beyond to fix it, but it's all the balance sheet as usual. So if this is allowed to pass, what happens when there's another Flint? Even if it's not water related, you know, there's catastrophes that happen in other places that aren't water related but are government man-made. What happens when they're allowed to do this in Flint and just leave people like this? I got a story. I'm not going to mention her name. You know who I'm talking about. A resident just drove with her kids to Mexico for dental care. Her teeth, her kids' teeth have either been falling out or discoloring or whatever it is. And because dental care here is so expensive per tooth, and most of these residents are not having Medicare, Medicaid fully cover their poisoning related illnesses, they had to drive from Flint, Michigan to Mexico just to get affordable dental care. I'm sure there's other stories of people driving to Canada or Mexico for health care, people who have been poisoned. So what do you think about that in terms of if they could do it here, could do it anywhere?
Well, most definitely, and I will say like Flint is kind of like this poster story where you have kind of like this nexus of institutional racism, corporate greed, and basically calluses. Because I'm like, if if people in charge like saw themselves in what was happening with us, like this wouldn't have happened. But there, when you see someone as kind of like when you're other people, like you're othering them, and you care more about like profits than you do like your like our humanity. Like that's how Flint's and what happened in Flint and other things are gonna happen and allow it to flourish. Because like even though there are other places that have like blood lead levels or water lead and water levels above the action level, what's different from them versus us is for it to happen here, we had our democracy taken away first, and we had no say in what happened. This wasn't like necessarily a result of lack of of community investment, even though like that in itself is a whole nother story. But the fact that you have someone who could come in, take away your democracy, saddle you with debt, poison you, and then you're still stuck with the tab. You still have to stay in your house. You're still dealing with all of this stuff that you never knew you had to deal with. On top of that, like you're just overall traumatized, and there are no resources to or any sort of like talks of reparations. It's basically like we're gonna give you, it's almost like you're at a buffet and they basically give you a biscuit. Like you're expected to be happy with the biscuit when you see like there's a full buffet in front of you, but you don't have the access, or you're not allowed, or you're trying to push your way to the buffet, and they just giving you a biscuit and they're like, well, you should just be happy you got the biscuit. It's like, no, we're not happy we got the biscuit. Like there's a buffet and we deserve that buffet.
Right. And you know, I would actually argue your democracy was stripped away long before the emergency manager. Just look at Detroit and Flint. Flint was at one time, probably about 30 years ago, like the symbol of the middle class. Ty and I took a driving tour around Flint a few weeks ago. I mean, it literally, some streets looks, what's the difference between Flint and Baghdad? Burned down houses, empty lots, lawn that haven't been mowed in years. Just disgusting. There's no other word for it, because of de-investment. But also in the 80s, the 90s, you had essentially banks writing these trade deals where that freed up General Motors, all these, whether it's car parts, steel mills, you name it, industry. The Rust Belt, they called it the Rust Belt for a reason, to send their jobs offshore. And slowly but surely, places like Flint, busy streets with kids running around in suburbia and the community pool and suburbia and the middle class became what it is now. It's 42% poverty and poor. Poor white, poor black, poor. And that's not democracy because people elect representatives to represent them, not Wall Street, not multinational corporations that wrote these trade deals.
Yeah.
And to me, what's really, really terrible is not only did you not have a say, but you are paying extra taxpayer dollars to pay for Rick Snyder's criminal defense fund, the governor, as well as all the other people who have been charged. Flint taxpayers, Michigan taxpayers are paying for that.
Yes, and that is, I would say, absolutely outrageous, and it adds insult to injury because while Rick Snyder is fighting against doing the right thing and making sure that we do have bottled water delivery, and even though we have these state managed water distribution sites, like for people who are elderly, I mean, a case of water is like 20 to 30 pounds, and expecting someone who's 80 to basically haul that water out of your house, like out of your car and take it into your house. I mean, I do it and I'm young and like that hurts my back. So just imagine what's happening with like the elderly, and if you don't have like someone with a young back to assist you, like it's just like absolutely horrible. And while that is happening, while we continue to pay for toxic water, Rick Snyder gets his legal fees paid for, just carte blanche. It's like, where's our legal fees? Like, we have to, like, where's our water bill? Like, while we're paying for your legal fees, like, we shouldn't be charged for water. And you should repair, like, all of our internal pipes.
And what about your medical bills?
And our medical bills. And make sure our teeth are fixed, because lead is a doppelganger and your body thinks that it's calcium and it's not. And that's why a lot of people's teeth is falling out, because the calcium, instead of calcium getting stored in your teeth and your bones and all that, like lead's being stored in there, but lead is not calcium. So your teeth are basically crumbling, your bones are getting brittle, your hair's falling out, and all this other mess.
And also, I'm sorry to say, I'm not fear-mongering, but this is just a fact. We don't even know the full effects yet. The full effects of lead poisoning, it could be anywhere from like 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, we still don't know like the full effects of the lead and all the other chemicals that people are being exposed to right now. Like, we don't even know half of those things, because the Safe Drinking Water Act doesn't mandate for them to test for all that. And the state continues to do the bare minimum. Like, the states have always had the power to go above and beyond federal standards. Just look at the minimum wage laws. Like, many states have minimum wage laws like above the federal standard. But with this, you have the state that is hiding behind the fact that they don't have to go above and beyond, and like being very gleeful in that fact. And it's like, you always have the power to go above and beyond any sort of like federal standards. And I know now, like, there's a bill that is going to limit like communities from going above federal standards, which is absolutely insane.
So what's the immediate circumstance that it's middle of July now? These pods are supposed to be closed in September. What is there efforts going on in the community? Also, as best you could describe, how much of the community will be negatively affected? Because as I said, you have 42% poverty. Water bottles are not cheap. 12 packs, 16 packs. By the way, it's not only for drinking your water, it's for cooking, it's for brushing your teeth. I've spoken with people who use bottled water to take a bath. There's a lot of things that they're using this bottled water for.
Yeah, and I know like right now there's talks of other people trying to pick up the tab with that, but one of the other things I wanted to highlight is like even though like the state like they have like nine in different geographical areas, like many like churches and nonprofits have have these sites as well where they are handing out water. And a lot of people don't, they may not know the difference between like this one's managed by the state versus this one is basically like your local Baptist church, that like the Baptist church network is kicking in and making sure that there's water being delivered here in Flint. But the thing that's definitely going to happen is once it becomes news that the state's closing down these pods, people are going to think, especially people who do not live in Flint, that things are getting better. And when you're thinking about like how your charitable donations are going to go, you're like, well, that's getting fixed. So I can just use my money or use my resources for like other endeavors. And that's kind of like what's happening right now, because like corporate media, like they're all gone. Like they're chasing whatever's happening with the Russia thing with Trump. Like that's where they're at right now. But you still have Flint residents, like nothing has changed since April 26th of 2014. Or after the internet, like we're still using bottled water to meet our daily needs. We're still paying a premium price for toxic water, but the difference is that we know how bad that the water is. Before, people didn't know, they were just paying for it and just trying to get along the best they could. But now it's like, well, you're getting along the best you could, but you know that this is poisoning you, but you don't have any other options, any other viable options that you can think of.
Last question. And by the way, I think I should start saying this. Today is 1,173 days. Correct me if I'm wrong. 1,173 days since the water was clean. That's important to know. Last question. Trolls will get at me, but whatever. I think this is beyond just racism. I think this is genocide. People have died, and people might die. Do you feel that essentially what's going on here, you said it best, while the rest of the media, people focus on things like Russia, which I'm not saying they shouldn't focus on, but there's proportion, and you could walk and chew gum at the same time. Do you kind of feel like you've all been left kind of to die?
Yes, and I would also say it's state-sanctioned violence, because this wasn't like a random corporation that did this. This is your government of people who were collectively elected, people who are appointed by like people in power, and this is continuing to happen. So this is just like one of the many ways of state-sanctioned violence. Like, I mean, what happened in Standing Rock was state-sanctioned violence. Right. What's happening here in Flint is state-sanctioned violence. And I think like when you think of it like that, because like when people think of genocides, they think of what happened during the Holocaust, or to some extent, like what happened with the Tutsi and the Hutu. But it's like, or in Bosnia, but this also is genocide by people who were elected, democratically elected, mind you. This isn't a case where there are dictatorships or coups d'etats or anything like that. But I would say that my final thoughts is this is the first time in the history of this country where you have a coup d'etat without firing a shot. That you have communities that are losing democracy because of financial debt.
Brought by the government.
That's brought by the government. And the financial debt that's happening is because we really need to talk about like some broader policies of how, like in Michigan, like how you're funding cities. And like the reason why cities in Michigan are running into debt is not because of, I'll say, racist tropes since Reconstruction. It's because it's healthcare, it's people's pensions, and then you have people getting, basically you're punishing communities because they're unable to pay for pensions, or their pensions and healthcare, retiree healthcare is more than what people, than what the taxes that they're able to bring in.
And Also, part of that reason they can't pay for them is because you've given billions of dollars in tax cuts to corporations, your donors, the usual. And that's bipartisan, by the way. Republican governors, Democrat governors.
Yeah, and when we think about the type of society we want to live in, it's like, do we want to live in a society where you're giving billions of dollars in tax breaks to multinational corporations, but you're cutting like Medicaid to the poorest of people? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, you're cutting the safety net. And that's like one of the things that we're monitoring as well, is what's going to happen with Trump care. Like, how is that going to impact the expansion, the Medicaid expansion that we do have, where more residents are able to actually receive health care?
I'll end with this. I believe we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary in August of the first advisory that went out. It was a boiling water advisory. I think it went out in August of 2014, right?
Yes.
And then there was another one. And boiling water, I'm not an expert, but my knowledge is usually if there's a boiling water notice, there's dangers of things like E. coli in water. And basically, even though there were red flags as early as actually weeks after they switched the water in April, the governor and the state pretended they didn't know anything for over a year after that. So this isn't only about now. This is about, I don't like when they be like, when everyone says, well, who knew what, when, why? It's like a little like everybody tries to find the next Watergate. But this is about who knew what, why, because like I said, if people responsible for poisoning, whether it's intentional or gross negligence, get away with it, and yes, some people have been charged, but there's a lot of people who should be charged, get away with it, don't expect your government officials to be held accountable. More importantly, don't expect your government officials to feel fear when they're making these decisions of accountability. The government needs to enter their mind that we can't only think about money. If we do this, there will be consequences. So I'm going to keep reporting in Flint as much as humanly possible until some level of justice comes. I know that bottom line, you don't have to get personal, but even you have health issues dealing with this. Everybody does. A lot of people didn't a year ago, but all of a sudden they're starting to have health issues associated with this. So thanks for taking the time. Where could people find out about Flint Rising?
Well, we have a website, flintrising.com. We're on Facebook, Flint Rising, and on Twitter at Flint Rising.
And you know what? I would say this. Summer. You want to take a road trip? Come to Flint. Oh, tell me you want to come to Flint. Talk to these fine people. They could use all the help they can get. So it's we drove here from Kentucky 4.5 hours while Ty drove. So I was working in the passenger seat. So people, they need you here. So if you can, great. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.